more serious reason we had you on. I've actually known you for like 10 years. This is the first time I talked to you, though, because we were talking back when the Abdullah situation happened. You were reporting on that and asking me some stuff. But now you did a Business Insider news article on the WWE Ring Boys scandal, which the main people involved were Mel Phillips and to a lesser extent Barry Garvin. Pat Patterson, from what I understand, had nothing to do with the Ring Boys scandal. There was a lot of rumors about him over the years, and he did resign for a period of time, but I don't believe he ever had anything to do with the Ring Boys because it was Mel Phillips who was actually hiring these Ring Boys and so forth. But you're the expert on it, so I'll let you get into it.
Where do you want me to start then?
Maybe with some background on like the whole situation, like what was the Ring Boy situation back then? Because they don't do that anymore, obviously. But from what I understand from talking to people like Danny Davis and Bill Anderson, who also had ring crews in those days, there were agents or ring crew members in each territory that would get like a flat rate, and then they would go out and hire kids cheaply to help them build these rings. And the kids, of course, really wanted to do it because it was in wrestling and they were making money. But a lot of bad stuff happened. Like Bill Anderson told me Dynamite Kid once drugged one of his ring boys. So, but Bill never dealt with Mel Phillips, I don't think.
Yeah, so I mean, it goes back to the territories, and for some reason, I mean, I don't know exactly. I mean, when I say for some reason, I guess the reason becomes obvious, but I don't know exactly, for example, when Mel Phillips became one of the ring crew chiefs. So I can't exactly pin that part down, which is important, but I haven't really been able to find the exact timing there. But in the territories, it was always a thing that there would be, teenage kids hanging around the arena trying to, get either a lowly paid gig or an unpaid gig helping set up the ring as a way to get into wrestling. The part where it gets, unusual even for that era is that WWF kept it even after they went national. And so it's complicated because the thing is that I would guess it would be Terry Garvin that was responsible because he was Mel Phillips' direct superior. But because of that still going on in the WWF, even though they did also have their more dedicated ring crew, your Tony Chimmel, Joey Morello before he was a referee, and then they started having referees do it at some point too. They still had the kids who were coming and getting, paid, whatever it was, $25 to help set up the ring. And Mel Phillips, also a ring announcer. I mean, what would you say he's best known for? He was the ring announcer on Wrestling Challenge for the first year and a half or so.
Terry Funk beating.
Yeah, Terry Funk beating him up, which I don't know if that's Terry's WWF debut, but it's one of his early WWF appearances. That, and then I guess the other thing people would best know him for as far as his actual work would be that he was the ring announcer on all of the big like WWF Japanese co-promotions in the early 90s. So, the US Japan Wrestling Summit, which is the show with Hansen versus Hogan. He's the WWF ring announcer on that. He's the WWF ring announcer on at least one of the shows they did with SWS. And, if you went to a house show in that era, if it was not a tour with Howard Finkel, it was a tour with Mel Phillips. So that's what he was best known for, like as a personality. So between the, after a certain point, kids would know him from TV, and also that he was the head of the ring crew, from multiple allegations. I don't know why I can't talk over something. Multiple allegations from different ring boys that he had a foot fetish and would groom them. And some of the allegations are that he would ask them to play a game where they would rub his feet on his groin. And there are other allegations too. One is from another guy who was part of the ring boy scene who said that, actually, what am I saying? This is one I can name. Sorry, there's a lot of, one of the things we noticed when we were editing the article is like there's a lot of names and you had to pare that down as much as possible to make it easier to understand. And you can see even I'm getting lost for a second. So one of the ring boys who actually did put his name to everything back, and this is back when everything first broke in 92, was Chris Lose. And he had alleged to the lawyer for Tom Cole, who's always been the most vocal of the ring boys, and you had his older brother Leon several weeks back. But Chris Lose had told Tom's lawyer in an interview transcript that I got from Phil Mushnick, because he saved a lot of his stuff, that one day this is actually the day he met Mel Phillips. They're talking outside the arena. He sees Honky Tonk Man walk by and addresses him by his real name. He says, "Hey, Wayne," or something like that. And Mel Phillips immediately stomps on his foot, like right on his big toe, for disrespecting the business. And then, according to this interview, once Los complained, Mel was like, "Well, let me see it," and then starts rubbing his foot for several minutes while repeatedly muttering in what he described as a weird voice, "You shouldn't have called Honky Tonk Man his real name." And that was corroborated by, he didn't want to put his name to the article because he was worried that people could find some of the victims who had not come forward by knowing his name. But someone who had actually been friends with Phillips but was not abused by him said he had witnessed him do similar things on at least 2 occasions where there was a teenage boy, maybe, wanting to help out with the ring crew. And, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second, seeing the chat messages pop up. That they would say something like, "Oh, is wrestling fake?" He would say, "Well, take your shoe off," and then start wrenching their toes while saying, "Does that feel fake?" So that's corroborated. And then, there was a lawsuit filed in 99. We didn't use his name because, he never sought any publicity. He didn't, have an expectation back then that people would be looking this up on the internet. And he made similar allegations to Tom Cole about, Phillips asking him to put his feet in his crotch. And there's at least a third allegation that's similar to that, where it's a friend of Los's whose name we didn't use because he never came forward. That it's interesting. Like, they ask him, what exactly did he do? And he says, like, got them in like some kind of body scissors, and he said, "Put us up near his," because I have to do this on the phone, I can't read the exact quote, but I forget if it says groin or crotch. And it's, it's hard to read from that if he means with the feet or whatever, but it's overall similar. So you have at least 3 allegations of that, and then at least, 2 people with 3 different occasions with different people of the injuring the foot and to massage it after someone disrespected the business, so to speak. So those are the underlying allegations, and I guess we'll go from there.
Right. So how did this eventually come public? Was this something that WWE discovered, or was this somebody bringing it to their attention, or one of the ring boys themselves just filing a legal situation out of nowhere?
So it's a kind of a little bit of everything. And we'll get to that in a second. A lot of this is in the article. Some isn't, just because of space considerations. But as far as when it breaks, so it's early 1992, and in March, sorry about that, there's an article in the San Diego Union Tribune by Jeff Savage, who is now not a reporter anymore, but has long been a successful children's book author. And if I had reported on this, and he actually did a follow-up too, because he expanded it for Penthouse, I could see why that would be a preferable career. But he spoke to Cole and Los, and that was when it first became a real public thing It's a little unclear. It seems like no one even remembers why it was him, because the Coles had first reached out to Phil Mushnick of the New York Post. But I'm guessing can't remember all of this, and this wasn't in the article, but I'm guessing it's because Phil is more of a columnist and Jeff Savage was more of an investigative reporter. So he publishes it first. Phil Mushnick does a lot of follow-ups, and everything kind of blows up quickly with The Donahue Show, Larry King, Geraldo Rivera is now It Can Be Told, etc., all wanting to cover this. And as some of the coverage is being prepared, and I do want to talk about this a bit, because the whole life of this part of the story is very strange to me. So early March, before anything comes out, and this would come out via stuff that Phil Mushnick wrote, and then later in his deposition when WWE sued him, that he has this set of conversations with Vince in early March, like a week or so before the stories start to come out, where Vince says to him that he had fired Mel Phillips 4 years earlier because he suspected he had a peculiar and unnatural relationship with children. But he very quickly rehired him. From the video evidence, it seems like only a matter of weeks at most, on the caveat that he stay away from kids, as if that's a good idea. And in the deposition, he also said that Vince mentioned that it was Linda as well that was involved in this decision. And Dave Meltzer had a conversation with him where he said similar things. Dave confirmed to me that that was an accurate account of the call, because when Mushnick ends up publishing an article that mentions this after Vince says he had no idea about any of this on Larry King, he mentions that Vince told it to Meltzer and then him. And Dave had referenced that in the previous Observer, and I don't mean this as a shot, but it was in the way where Dave is sometimes, between how he's trying to explain the sourcing or whatever, it's not as clear as it should be. So I don't think people picked up on that. If you know the whole thing, you realize what that is. But either way, he confirmed it to me, and Mushnick gave more details in his deposition. And to this day, not in their response to us, not when they sued Mushnick, not when they were asking him about his deposition. WWE has never refuted that what Dave and Phil said were accurate accounts of their conversations with Vince, which I don't understand how they try to reconcile that with everything else, they said in their response to us. But if you're not denying that they said that he said that to them, I don't understand what the issue even is.
And you mentioned the infamous appearance on the Donahue Show, where you mentioned they settled with the one boy in the article. I believe it was Cole, and he was actually in the crowd with Linda McMahon in case something was brought up. But what stands out to me about that Donahue Show is Bruno Sammartino was always a very credible person, and he was saying that this kind of stuff went on. Do you believe he was just bitter against WWE that time, or do you think he was being honest? Because ultimately, 15, 20 years later, he ended up making up with WWE.
I mean, I get what you're saying as far as him making up with WWE, but I mean, I do believe that he was honest there. We didn't end up using this part in the article, but he was deposed in the Mushnick lawsuit too, and we only have like a page or so of it that WWE filed, with the idea being that exhibit showed that he didn't have firsthand knowledge, because he did freely admit that he was not there for the incident he was describing, which was Phillips being caught abusing a boy in a car, I think in the parking lot in Allentown, and security guards or someone taking him to, I think, both Vince McMahon, Sr. and Jr., and according to the way Bruno heard it, saying that they'd take care of it. In the deposition, he says, while he was not there when that happened, that he he heard it from a ton of people. He said that it was something that everyone was talking about at the time. And Superstar Graham also says he was there. Now, while Graham did say things in '92 that he later retracted and said was him trying to damage people, namely that he saw Pat Patterson grabbing a ring boy by the crotch, he never actually recanted what he said about the Phillips thing, as far as I can tell. If you look at his book, the specific thing he's retracting is what he said about Patterson.
And also, one more thing, that book was put out by WWE.
Yes.
And they put him back on the payroll at that time, gave him house show appearances, put him in the Hall of Fame, and he needed money. So, of course, he's going to be happy with, and I'm good friends with him.
I know.
But of course, he's going to go along with whatever they want him to say, because he's also getting a large chunk of money for that book.
Right. But even then, he still didn't say, I wasn't there for this Mel Phillips thing either. He didn't say that. So is his credibility as high as some other people's? No. But fact of the matter is, he retracted one thing but not the other, and that does kind of speak loudly. He's the only person we've heard from completely firsthand, but I do kind of believe him on this one, but it's tricky. And I'm trying to think, was there anything else? There is. Okay, so we do allude to in the article too. So when Jeff Savage expanded on his story for a feature in Penthouse, go ahead.
Bring it up quick about Graham just before we go off of him. The last time I interviewed him, I actually asked him about this. And he asked me to take it out of the interview because he said he just doesn't want to talk about it either one way or another anymore.
Gotcha. So there is an allusion in the Penthouse story, which was Jeff Savage expanding his San Diego Union Tribune story, where he does say that he does allude to that, and then he also says that Phillips was suspended, I think was the term he used, for a similar incident years later. Whether or not that's what caused the issue in 1988 that Phillips was briefly fired for, not entirely clear if that did happen. But if there's any details about that, he didn't run with them. The sourcing on parts of that article aren't great. There are some errors that, as far as I know, weren't fixed. There's a thing about the Donahue show, an anecdote, and I think it says Lee Cole went to one of the producers after and said Vince is the only person who cares, when it was actually Tom, in the immediate aftermath of the settlement. So, there are some issues with that article. I find it overall credible and find that Savage did good work, but there are some things that you could potentially take issue with as far as that article. But I guess that answers what we were going for there. And then as far as, we don't mention Patterson in the article, for the record. Because it's just a little unclear as far as what he was accused for on the ring boy side and when. And because, we have the known false allegation from Murray Hodgson about the sexual harassment. It's just not worth dealing with if you have the otherwise, more, solid information about Phillips and to an extent Garv.
The one thing about Patterson, though, is at one point before he resigned temporarily due to all the allegations, he was head of talent relations, wasn't he? And he was never brought back to the same position, being in charge of talent. He was more of a producer after, and now he's a consultant.
I think you're right that he was not a VP again after that, if I remember right. Him and Garvin were both vice presidents in some form. I forget the exact titles, but you can find, I have it posted somewhere too, there is an org chart of the executive level jobs that was filed with some state where they had to have a business registration around 90, 91. So you can see what the actual jobs are. And I think it might have used the gimmick names for both guys too, which is just a thing that WWE did for people who used to be wrestlers. Patterson, I believe Pat Patterson was always called that Patterson. I believe Terry Garvin was always called Terry Garvin. I think J.J. Dillon, who I want to be clear didn't do anything wrong, but I'm only mentioning because of the name thing, was always J.J. Dillon and not James Morrison, etc. So just random trivia there. But yeah, I don't think Pat is in an executive role again after he comes back later in '92. And now the resignation thing is interesting too. Vince at the time said it was resignations because they loved the WWF so much. Later, they say that Phillips was suspended pending an investigation, presumably because he's the only one with really racking up criminal accusations. And what Linda would say on News 12 Connecticut over a year later was that the investigation was taking so long and so damaging to the company that they figured it was better for them and Mel to part ways.
Now, was there any new, there was some new information that I noticed that I hadn't heard before, like Mel stepping on the kids' feet, hurting the feet, and then asking to see them after. That was the first I heard of that. But was there anything in your Business Insider report that you didn't know before that kind of was brought to light in your report?
That would be one of the things. There's some stuff that was just ended up, strengthening things. So it's hard to say, a lot of from pulling the Mushnick lawsuit and some of the records that were in that, or being able to go through the stuff that Mushnick had in his archives. There's stuff that it's okay. So for example, obviously we know the story of how Tom Cole gets fired after he settles with them and gets hired back for it was actually a job in the warehouse that he ends up getting fired from, on his first day after rebuffing the advance of Terry Garvin, which by that point he's 19, not that it makes it that much better. And he said, and WWE kind of even conceded in their letter to us, that Garvin had also made a similar come on when he was 16 in a hotel. So, as far as what else did I not know going into this, again, with the whole phone setup. Well, actually, wait a second. This does keep me on here while I go into other windows. If you give me 1 second, I can scroll through it real quick. But that was something I definitely didn't know before. Honestly, the Phillips being fired and rehired thing, even though it was kind of out in the open, I didn't know, just because for some reason no one's retrospectives ever covered it. And then especially getting the extra details from the deposition, that was definitely new. There was another person who, we don't mention the name, was referred to as Mrs. Mel Phillips within WWE, according to what Mushnick had been told. And he says, he mentions the name to Vince, and Vince is like, oh, that's Mel's guy. He has his parents' permission. And then when Phil was asked in the deposition, well, would you approve of the relationship, or would you have any problem with the relationship if the guy in question was over 18? And Phil says that according to what he had been told, the guy was mentally slow. So that was something I certainly hadn't heard before. As I scroll through this here, I'm trying to think, something that's not necessarily new information per se, but, we have quoted and then also linked Linda's termination letter to Tom Cole, which is kind of a weird read because she talks about him ruining the great opportunity they gave him, ignoring the context of how he arrived at that opportunity for them to pay for him to go to school. Those are some of the things that come to mind. Some of the, even just some of the quotes I had to someone who was a pretty high level employee when this was going on. And just even the way he described it to me, he was almost crying when he said to me, it was, quote, the boys that the company hired to put up the ring and so forth, they were being had, with the pause there and him trying to find the right word, by some of the folks who were on the wrestling ops side of things, and was just generally known by everybody that was going on. And, he suspected the McMahons knew what was going on and did nothing to stop it. And he said there wasn't a damn thing we could do about it. So I mean, that's another person who was working there, also backing all this up as well. Trying to think if there's any. I mean, that's off the top of my head. I feel like I'm forgetting a bunch of stuff.
You're freezing up a bit, by the way. I don't know, like
maybe I need to switch back to the tab. Yeah, let's see.
Yeah, your picture, just to let the fans know it's not their computer. Okay, you're moving again now.
Yeah, okay. I figured that could cause an issue, but it seemed to be working at first, but I'll try not to do that again. But I mean, there's more in there. I mean, there's so much between the edit and then what take it. I mean, it's hard to focus on the new versus the old sometimes. So I would suggest everyone read it at the link that's in the description.
Yeah, there's a lot of information in there. What do you think about there was always I guess it's a rumor, but I'm from the Montreal area, and apparently Sylvain Grenier was basically a stripper when he was discovered by Pat Patterson, and they had that was back in the days before they were really signing people with no wrestling experience.
Right.
But do you find it weird that I know he's been released now from his agent's job, but the first guy from the concussions lawsuit that WWE had anything to do with again was Sylvain Grenier?
I mean, it is weird because he's not the type of person you would expect to get an agent job. He just isn't. And I say that as someone who thought he became a pretty good wrestler at the end. Like, it took some time, but he was super green when they first started using him. If I remember right, he was considered so green he wasn't on OVW TV. But, from teaming with Rob Conway, teaming with Rene Dupree, putting in his time, he did become a pretty solid wrestler. But if I remember right, he was let go not long after that. And I don't think he stuck around wrestling that much, did he?
No, he had been out of wrestling for like 8 years. Like, he tried to start his own company in Montreal, but it went out of business. And then he was just doing like acting jobs and various stuff. So it was just weird that they seemed to hold such a grudge against everyone else from the concussion lawsuit, right. A lot of who were bigger stars who could actually contribute more. But for whatever reason, I'm going to guess it was his connection with Patterson that they brought him back. But obviously, it didn't work out as an agent for him. But I just found that weird.
And I mean, and it's weird, but I mean, if you think they had a relationship, still he was an adult when they met. If he helped him get a job, whatever. Like, if that's what happened, I'm not saying it did. I know that's always been kind of intimated. I don't see anything there really, but I agree with you that his being hired as an agent just came off very strange.
And what do you think about the rumors about Lombardi and Patterson over the years? Because Lombardi did have a job for like seemingly over 20 years. It may not have been a main event star, but he was paid well for a long time. I don't know exactly how many years, but it has to be somewhat of a record.
Well, I mean, I gotta think by the time he's not really wrestling regularly anymore for them. So let's say like mid-90s at the latest, he was mainly a producer / agent / whatever. So just strictly as that, I gotta think he was there for good, just in that role, like 15 years. But as far as just working for the company in some form, it's decades as a wrestler and everything else. As far as that or like other like casting couch type stuff, I don't know what to think sometimes with the Lombardi thing, because like one person, for example, I remember Dusty Wolf saying, I think it was on Wrestling Classics, that he felt like he never saw any indication that they were a couple. And that he never saw any indication that Pat was cheating on Louie. And I've always kind of found Dusty pretty credible. So, granted, you have stuff like, Irv Muchnick did an article. I think it was the one he did for like the magazine that the like Museum of Sex here in New York did. Where he refers to Lombardi as Pat Patterson's boyfriend, and he never got any issues with it, but and look, clearly there's stuff going on. Like, with the Terry Garvin School of Self-Defense jokes, but even there, it's like they're being vague with it, and then, Pat Patterson teaches go-behinds as far as like how much of that is homophobia, how much is, go ahead.
I was just going to say that Kamala, who Lombardi was kimchi, did say that he witnessed some weird stuff going on just from the other side. Kamala didn't seem to be that much of a liar over the years, but I'm not saying it's true or anything. I've only met Patterson a few times, and I never had that experience, but I was never under contract.
If nothing else, it is clear that Patterson, trained him as a wrestler and looked after him and stuff. I think that's clear. Whether or not there was a relationship, I don't know. Were there clearly, from some of the allegations, are there people who probably did get preferential treatment in some form? I mean, we don't have anything definitive. Really? When you think about it, it is the Phillips stuff that we really do know the most about. Is it that because it's criminal? I don't know. But I'm just never sure what to think about some of the other stuff. Look, obviously Terry Garvin was something of a predator. I believe Tom Cole's story. There's a story in Shauna Sales' book, Sex, Lies, and Headlocks, where he quotes Nelson Swagler, who was in charge of TV for them before Kevin Dunn. And was also, I think they say he was an operations manager, I think. And he describes walking into a tour bus and seeing Garvin, I think the words he used were hard at it with someone he described as a ring boy. But doesn't mention an age or anything, so can't really know exactly what that means. But still, was there stuff happening? Yes. Are there other things I believe too? Tom Hankins, who was on Donahue. His story, and he's always been pretty consistent, was that he went to a bar, I think the night before an LA Sports Arena show at the hotel, and he asked Patterson what he could do to just get on cards doing jobs and stuff, on TV tapings. He wasn't asking for a job or a push or anything. He was just saying, hey, would I be able to pick up some job guy work? And I forget the exact quote, but it's according to Hankins, Pat said something like, you only have, your chances are between slim and none, or he said you only have two chances, slim and none. And that then he said, actually, there's a way. And if I remember the way he describes it in his letter and then his book, it was something to the effect of about his enjoyment of performing oral sex on other men, and that he'd give him the shot if they went upstairs to the hotel room and did that. Which I know, Dave Meltzer has said that Pat had a history apparently of saying stuff like that in bars, just as a grandstand sort of joking around, but not exactly type of thing. But Tom Hankins has always been very consistent that it was not a joke. And part of that was that, he showed up at the Coliseum the next day, being a guy who had just been around the scene for years. He was always allowed to hang out in the locker room. That night he was kicked out. So there's that. There's, like I said, even though Murray Hodgson was proven to be making his allegation up, there is Tom Hankins. There is, oh God, who am I forgetting all of a sudden?
Powers. I've heard Shane Douglas tell the story of Jim Powers and a bunch of other people. I've been trying to get an interview with him, but he's hard to track down. But there's all these rumors that the reason there was some fishy stuff going on there, and then he ultimately left because of some of this stuff. I was just wondering if you ever heard any more details on Jim Powers, who was in WWE for a while as a low.
Not that I can think of, and he was there as an extra on and off for several more years after that, until he went to WCW. So I don't really know anything about Jim Powers that I can think of.
No problem. I hope to ask him one day, but I was just wondering if your research, anything came up to substantiate Shane's claims. And I think Sid Justice also had made some claims about Jim Powers. So,
and there's other stuff out there.
Did you ever see that interview I did with Sid about Patterson inviting him up to his room to watch Lightning?
I watched, I think, some of the Sid clips, but I don't remember that one.
Okay, yeah. He said he came up to him at the hotel desk once and like got him in like a go behind. He said, "I got you, big guy." And it was like right when he had first joined the company, and Sid was very uncomfortable because obviously Pat was in a position of power, and it's like, okay, this guy's just waist lost me from behind. Is he joking around? And then
Right.
he was sitting at a table and with Pat and Vince, and then Sid said that Vince got up to go to the bathroom or something, and Pat looked at Sid and said, "Look at the ass on that guy, isn't it spectacular?" or something like that. So he said he didn't know if they were ribbing him or if that was some way of coming on. But we know the ribs were pretty brutal in those days.
Right. I mean, with Patterson, and like one of the things we know about him, and this is not something I'm saying is negative, to be clear, like he absolutely had a habit of just blurting out the first time he met another wrestler that he was gay to gauge their reaction and stuff like that. So, you know, in the context of a wrestling locker room, I'm sure there's stuff that would have crossed a line but was not intended that way. I don't know. It's hard to pin down a lot of that, I feel like, but clearly something happened. I mean, you know, and then there's also the issue that, you know, Garvin was Phillips's direct superior and Patterson was Garvin's direct superior, and Patterson and Garvin had been friends for decades. I mean, like since they were kids. Like they grew up in the same neighborhood. I think it was, if I remember right, it was them and Chin Lee who all broke in together by heading to Boston. So they had known each other forever. And look, abusers are good at hiding things from friends and stuff. So it's obviously possible that he didn't know stuff. But look, we know they knew Mel Phillips had a foot fetish. How did they know he had a foot fetish? You know, we know there's at least one incident, it's in Bret Hart's book, where there was a referee who roomed with Mel and said he woke up to Mel sucking hard on his toe, you know, without his consent. But, you know, I have no idea where that would fit into other things they would have heard, you know. So it's like, it's one of these weird things where, like, yeah, it's theoretically possible that there's a wrestler making a Mel Phillips foot joke that doesn't know he's talking about child abuse back in that era. Because maybe they only heard about one thing. Or, you know, even with the Terry Garvin School of Self-Defense and Pat Patterson teaches go-behinds their stuff, like, is that just homophobia and homophobic jokes, especially for the era? Or because, you know, especially the self-defense part, is that talking about unwanted advances? Based just on what they mean there, hard to say, I guess.
This is kind of off topic, but I know you really are detailed and up to date in the current news. There's a bunch of people asking your thoughts about the Matt Riddle situation, and do you think they changed his name to Riddle, so it's more Google friendly now? Because if you search Riddle, like Riddle stuff will show up, where if Matt Riddle, all those lawsuit articles will show up.
You mean the lawsuit articles that I wrote?
Yeah, you and others, but I know you've been close to this, so maybe
So
situation.
I haven't like asked around within WWE, but I mean, I had that assumption before Meltzer or anyone else said they heard that was why. Like, it seemed like the obvious explanation. You know, Vince has weird whims about names. So it wouldn't shock me if it was just that. But even then, usually when he's done that, where he just takes away a wrestler's first name, there are much better names than Riddle as a wrestler name on its own. You know, Cesaro, even Neville. I feel like there's a bunch I'm forgetting, but those have a way that they work on their own, not something like Riddle, which is also, you know, just a regular word too. So I don't know for sure, but also, I mean, the other thing with, you know, at least Melt's reporting it is that from the information he's had so far, it seems like he's hearing things from the Riddle side. So, you know, it's obvious, it's not self-serving if someone close with Riddle told him that. So I kind of do buy this one because I just can't think of what else it would be except for just an unexplained Vince whim, which it could very well be. But it's stupid too because if they look up Riddle WWE or Riddle wrestler, the way Google works now, they're just going to take you to Matt Riddle's Wikipedia or whatever. Especially now, the way Google is kind of geared to where it's geared more towards like digital assistant stuff. So if you put in Riddle WWE, of course it knows what you're looking for. So I got to think though, if that was the idea, they didn't think it through that far. So I can buy that.
And what you've researched by the case, do you think that case has merit? I found that email very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The girl lost her extra jobs due to a situation with talent because it kind of shows that if you're an established talent, you can have pull on who gets hired and who doesn't.
Right. So, okay. So it's Candy Cartwright, real name Samantha, I forget if it's Tavel or Tavel. She had an affair with Riddle. They both admitted that, but what she's alleged is that he assaulted her at times during that affair. And I mean, the thing is that to me, Riddle's side is the one that's just completely acted guilty so much. They tried to file this restraining order against her. In the application said that she had made threats and used weapons and stuff. And then when her lawyer, and she managed to get through financial help from Times Out Legal Fund, a really excellent lawyer, the lawyer's like, you haven't offered any evidence of this. And then when Riddle's lawyer responded, he was like, oh, we didn't say that she threatened him or used any weapons. So it starts there. Then eventually, he dropped the petition 36 hours before the hearing because they needed a hearing because the judge wouldn't give him a temporary one on the evidence he submitted. They've claimed all sorts of stuff that theoretically they would have backup of, like threatening texts, and none of it's showed up. They claim she posted his address and phone number on Twitter, and she did. His address, his and his wife's address and his wife's phone number, and she did momentarily post a screenshot of a text that Lisa Riddle had sent her, but clearly it was just a brain fart, and then she deleted it, cropped it out, and just showed the rest of the text. And just, I buy it, because if she was meaning to dox Lisa Riddle, she would have left it up. The only logical thing is that it was just a mistake. And the address thing wasn't even her. That was someone in the replies. And then when they were trying to present their evidence that she had posted the phone number, they used a printout of the second tweet that didn't have the phone number, but with a piece of paper over it as a redaction to make it look like they were redacting Lisa Riddle's phone number. And, Candy Cartwright's lawyer pointed out that it looked like they were trying to fabricate evidence. So between that, it appears he said something, ranted his side is that she was stalking him. So in the event that were true, you could see how he would do this either way, that after she had gotten booked for extra work, it sure looks like he said something and the extra work got canceled. Now, he's also claimed that she had shown up at Full Sail and made a scene and had to be escorted off the premises by security. First, he said it was in February. Then he said it was in December. Now it doesn't seem like they're giving a real date. Well, it certainly wouldn't have been December because they wouldn't have booked her in January for extra work in February and March. In February, there's only a few times where it could have happened, and I believe she has proof that she was not in Florida. So, between the two, she really does come off much more credible to me so far. And I do want to add too, and I did write something about this as well on my blog, that, since I just saw the chat, for the record, I'm not originally from Brooklyn. I live in Brooklyn. I'm from Long Island. Thankfully, I don't have too strong an accent. By normal person standards, I have a New York accent. By New York standards, I don't. So as far as Candy Cartwright, sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was I saying? What was I up to?
You were going through the Candy Cartwright.
Oh, the making a scene allegedly. Yeah. So it doesn't seem like there's any evidence of that. No one I've asked has ever heard of anything of that. Even, other reporters who are doing more of the day-to-day news grind, no one heard of this. And, it's the type of thing that would make the rounds, in wrestling as gossip. If a wrestler who was stalking another wrestler, as he's alleged, showed up at an NXT taping at Full Sail and had to be escorted off the premises. So, I mean, so far she comes off much more credible than him, and now she sued him, WWE and Gabe Sapolsky, and I'm curious to see how that goes.
I would suspect it's not going to go to court, and I suspect it won't settle for anywhere near the amount she wants. There's a bunch of people, you may have seen some of the comments that commented on the Roddy Piper. I believe it was a You Shoot video, maybe from 10 years ago.
It was it was Kayfabe Commentaries. I think it was the Breaking Kayfabe series, which is supposed to be like the more like real life, get to know the person series.
Yeah, well, there's one, I think whoever uploaded it edited parts out of it, but there's an online version, which I have seen, where he goes into talking about Patterson and some other stuff, but it's like he's more staring off into space, and it never says, at least on the online version, what actually happened. Do you know anything about that? Because obviously they were on Legends House together later on.
Right. Although, actually, wait a second. When was that? Because remember, Legends House was in the can for a couple of years before they released it. When was the You Shoot about? Well, Piper died in 2015, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and Legends House would have been taped around 2030. Okay, I think it was before Legends House, but I've never been sure what to think of that, because I forget exactly how they got into it, what Sean Oliver said. But you're right. Piper never says anything specific, but he's talking about Patterson, and he says something like, man, I was just a 15-year-old kid. The inference is pretty clear. But then when it blew up, and this is when he had his podcast, he went off on people reading that into it and said no, that Pat Patterson had never done anything to him. I'm just not sure what to think of it, because how do I put this? Do I think that some things probably happened to Roddy as, basically a street kid as a teenager? Quite possibly, but he never said anything specific, and then got really angry when people read it the way that everyone else would. But, who knows? It's Roddy Piper. Like, we're talking about the guy who, and I'm not saying this means he's not telling the truth. I'm just saying the guy clearly had some issues he needed to deal with. Like, the story of when he was at a Portland wrestling taping and pulled Brian Alvarez into a closet and just put a lighter up to near their heads for light, and basically said, what was it? Something like to tell Dave Meltzer that he was going to kill him or something like that. So, I mean, and then like the next day being super nice to him, good to see you, kid, nice meeting you type of stuff. So Roddy had stuff he had to deal with without him actually giving any details. I just don't know how much we can read into that, given his reaction once people read into it.
And I remember, like, this is just Bruce Hart hearsay, and we all know Bruce tells stories here and there, but I remember Bruce saying that him and Rick Martel, there was something going on between those two more than just friends. So who knows if a lot of wrestlers are bisexual. Like, that's one thing I've learned, but who knows? And then there's also the story Piper says about Lord Alfred Hayes putting his dick on him or something. And there's a lot of stuff about Lord Alfred Hayes being inappropriate, but he's long past, so there's no need to bring that up.
Yeah.
As far as this, I don't know any research into this. I haven't done any research, so this will be the first time covering it on my channel. The thing with Luke Gallows' tag team partner Carl Anderson, What's going on with that?
Oh, I don't know anything beyond what everyone else has seen with his wife posting about him cheating on her. That I've just seen what everyone else has seen.
So
for those who didn't see
the picture, she's posted some picture on.
Yeah, he was sleeping and she scrawled cheater all over his face and his body, and then she posted another thing kind of explaining that it was not a joke or anything. I don't know. I mean, if it happens, it sucks. They have kids, but I don't get that scandalized by a wrestler cheating on his wife, unfortunately.
No, I mean, it's less common these days, but definitely that was common practice with probably the majority back in the days when they were on the road more.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's sad. It's a sad thing to see when it goes public like that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, especially I don't know how old their kids are, but can't be that old. So if they, end up seeing that stuff, it's not good. It's an unfortunate thing. If somehow they could work it out in a real way, obviously that would be for the best. But the way things have been going, it certainly doesn't look that way.
Now, I'll give you a chance here to plug your social media and to plug where people can follow you if they want to. Obviously, the report, by the way, the Business Insider link is right in the description of this video. But I'll let Brian let you know what he's been up to if you want.
Brian?
Sorry, David. I was thinking Brian Alvarez again because
of the thing we talked about with Piper. Yeah.
You mysterious joke sheet that you did earlier, which, by the way, everyone knows here. I do read the Observer. I don't think that obviously there's some more credible stuff than other on there, but I still use it as a news source. So I'm no basher of them by any stretch. But as far as your plugs, David Bixenspan.
Yes. Actually, real quick, I do want to say, by the way, that even if someone thinks that Dave and Brian have a bias towards AEW, no one's getting paid by AEW. If there is a bias, it's because Tony Khan's an Observer reader for decades and a letter writer and stuff who started a major promotion and all that. You know what I mean? And I'm sure a lot of it, if it's there, is not conscious. It's like people, when they get their ideas of bias being payoffs and stuff. No, it's not that. It's human biases. You know what I mean? So anyway, just wanted to get that out there.
As far as their advertising payoffs, I'm sure WWE pays them to advertise on their website too, right? They don't.
I mean, I've seen maybe indirectly Google stuff. I'm not sure about directly. Okay. But anyway, social media plugs and stuff. So you can follow me on Twitter at David Bix. All the stuff I write and podcasts and stuff, I'll get linked there. Every week comes out, late Sunday, early Monday podcast I do with historian Chris Zellner, Between the Sheets, where every week we go over a week in wrestling history as it was covered in the newsletters. The one that'll be coming out late tonight is 1995, looking at the week that included Halloween Havoc, as well as the ECW fire incident with the former Chikara and GCW, etc., play-by-play announcer Joe Sposto, who was at the show as our guest. So that's coming out. We also have Patreon, patreon.com/Between the Sheets, where at a minimum, every month, if you do at least the $5 level, you get a themed bonus show. And when I say themed, these are deep dives on individual topics. Right now, we are on part 4 of probably 6 on ECW's run on TNN. And that stuff's been, honestly, I think some of the best stuff we've done. So there's that and so much other stuff. We also have a couple of the older deep dives in the regular free feed, including one on Herb Abrams' UWF. So check that out as well. You can also follow the podcast on Twitter at BTSheetsPod. Podcast available where you can find podcasts just about everywhere. There are other podcasts in Between the Sheets. It's the one with me and Chris listed as the hosts. And also, I do have an account on Substack that if I'm not pitching something somewhere, so some of my weirder, more esoteric, or honestly stuff I'm not necessarily going to get paid much for elsewhere, I throw on there. That's where I have the Matt Riddle stuff. That's where I have a bunch of other stuff. It's babyfacevheel.com. Most of what goes up is free, but I put up some exclusive pay stuff, and if you pay to subscribe, then you're also just helping support me and the work I'm doing, where, you know, I would love to be able to establish my own thing that supports me, but I mean, I don't know if that necessarily works with the type of reporting I do, since I'm not like, what's the best way to put this? I found like I'm not good at like the boom, 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 scoop, 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 one after the other news grind. It's not it doesn't work for me. Some people it doesn't work for. There are other people who are great writers and good reporters who just aren't good fits at that. And I find I'm better with deep dives, looking into documents and stuff. Like that seems to be my niche, and it's worked out pretty well.
And I'll give you one easy question because it's
okay.
a question. He wants to know what your favorite wrestler is. Now that I'm retired, you don't have to say me.
Current favorite wrestler or all-time favorite wrestler?
Let's say all-time favorite.
Ooh. For a long time, it was Mick Foley. More recently, in terms of like who could I probably watch the most stuff of, I can almost say more of an archetype in a way. So I would, because the three names that came to mind immediately were Ricky Morton, Ricky Steamboat, and Ken Kobashi. And I feel like you can kind of find the thing that those three have in common as far as the facial expressions and the drama and everything. So I'll just go with that.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for your time and for clearing up the AEW thing, for getting into the Ring Boys scandal, for talking about the Riddle and the Carl Anderson stuff, which at least got him back in the news. He's been in the oblivion of Impact Wrestling
for
so long that at least his name is in the news again on a bright side. But I'll let you close this up however you want.
Don't have much else to add. Just want to thank you for having me on here, and I hope everyone checks out the article that's linked in the description if they haven't yet, because, you know, even the stuff that was already out there, a lot of people don't really know about it, and those who do don't know everything that's in there. So really hope everyone checks it out, and appreciate everyone's feedback. Feel free to reach out to me on social media or email or whatever.